Exactly at 3:45 a.m. on October 12, 2025, a merchant cargo ship was intercepted in international waters of the Caribbean by a U.S. Navy unit. The freighter was transporting about 20 tons of cargo classified as suspicious, bound for Caracas, according to a Pentagon statement. It was escorted to a port on the coast of Curaçao for a thorough inspection. The operation, planned from a naval headquarters in Puerto Rico, lasted approximately 4 hours and put maritime routes between Venezuela and Caribbean countries on alert. At 8:05 a.m., the freighter was already in custody, with no visible resistance, while Southern Command drones monitored the operation from 150 kilometers away. According to official sources, the interdiction operation was supported by satellite intelligence and prior maritime tracking. The vessel was directed towards a corridor supervised by U.S. naval units in the Southern Caribbean, within the area of responsibility of the Southern Command. Reports indicate that U.S. Navy patrol boats and a frigate with advanced surveillance systems were used, with no fire or confrontation reported. This incident is part of a broader strategy. Since early September 2025, Washington has intensified naval operations in the Caribbean, with the stated goal of cutting alleged drug routes originating from Venezuela. In the first episode of this cycle, on September 2nd, a U.S. attack sank a boat that, according to the White House, was transporting narcotics, leaving 11 dead. Additionally, on September 13th, Venezuela denounced that a U.S. destroyer boarded a Venezuelan fishing vessel for 8 hours, which increased diplomatic tension. The vessel was identified as the USS Jason Dunham DDG-109. The freighter detained this time was never publicly identified by name or flag, nor was the exact cargo specified, other than being qualified as suspicious. Some analysts suggest it could be dual-use materials, sanctioned merchandise, or even energy products. The opacity fuels concern in Venezuelan ports and among logistics operators. From a military perspective, the operation demonstrates coordination between maritime surveillance, advanced intelligence, and naval projection capability. The escort to Curaçao indicates that the U.S. Navy sought to maintain transparency for inspections and avoid immediate diplomatic clashes. However, the action makes it clear that Washington is willing to exercise effective control over maritime routes it previously considered free. The detention of the freighter with 20 tons headed for Caracas was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern consolidating since early September. U.S. authorities assert that these operations respond to a sustained interdiction plan, whose purpose is to cut alleged smuggling routes and pressure the Venezuelan government economically and logistically. Firstly, Washington seeks to disrupt the flow of sanctioned goods. According to the State Department, some vessels may be transporting materials linked to energy or refining programs under international sanction. These measures not only affect oil, but also the supply of chemicals, spare parts, and machinery heading to Venezuelan refineries. Secondly, the military objective is to maintain a deterrent presence in the Caribbean. The U.S. Navy has increased the number of patrols, with joint operations between the Southern Command and the Coast Guard. In October alone, 5 interception missions have been counted, all involving MQ-9 Reaper surveillance drones and Freedom-class frigates equipped with SPY-1D radars. And thirdly, intelligence services seek to obtain logistical information about the maritime corridors used by Venezuela. Through navigation logs and cargo inspections, data is collected that can be used for future sanctions or targeted blockades. In this context, the October 12th operation lasted exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes from the moment of sighting until arrival at port. The first detection occurred at 3:45 a.m. at 92 nautical miles northeast of La Orchila, and the boarding order was issued at 4:32 a.m. After a container search using portable gamma rays, the freighter's captain was escorted aboard the frigate USS Detroit LCS-7, while Seahawk helicopters monitored the perimeter. The initial inspection determined that the cargo included unmarked metal tanks, high-capacity electrical equipment, and sealed drums, sufficient reason to transfer the vessel to Curaçao, where they arrived at 7:59 a.m., under the joint supervision of U.S. and Dutch agents. None of the 18 crew members were detained, although their passports were retained during the process. However, this type of operation involves significant risks. Firstly, multi-flag incidents, as some vessels operate under flags of convenience and owners from different countries. Any error could lead to international litigation or diplomatic claims. Secondly, there is the risk of dangerous diversions. To avoid control zones, some captains opt for longer or less secure routes, increasing the probability of accidents or piracy. And finally, the political risk. Caracas has called the actions covert aggressions and violations of maritime sovereignty, while Washington insists they are legitimate interdiction operations in accordance with international law. The tension, however, does not stop in the Caribbean. Behind every inspection is a broader board that includes trade, allied ports, and control of energy routes. The detention of the freighter with 20 tons not only sets a military precedent, but also directly impacts maritime trade and the economic stability of the Caribbean and South America. What began as a specific operation is now interpreted as a sign that the United States could be progressively closing the maritime route to Caracas. According to the International Maritime Organization, IMO, more than 65% of Venezuelan imports enter by sea. The route from Panama, Trinidad, and Curaçao to the ports of La Guaira and Puerto Cabello is essential for the flow of food, medicine, and spare parts. Therefore, the U.S. naval reinforcement has an immediate effect: the increase in transportation costs and the reduction in the number of freighters willing to sail to Venezuela. Since the October 12th operation, at least 7 private shipping companies have requested a review of maritime insurance due to the risk of interdiction. New contracts include clauses that raise premiums by up to 35% more compared to the September average. Furthermore, the port of Willemstad, in Curaçao, records an 18% increase in inspection traffic linked to cargo destined for Venezuela. On the other hand, transit time between Caribbean ports and Venezuela has been extended by an average of 36 additional hours due to forced diversions and more rigorous customs controls. In practical terms, this implies logistical losses for port operators and increased costs for basic goods, especially refined fuels, food, and pharmaceutical products. The pressure also extends to the political arena. The governments of the Netherlands, Panama, and the Dominican Republic have expressed concern about the frequency of searches, although they maintain cooperation with Washington so far. Meanwhile, Caracas has requested a review of the U.S. Navy's actions from the UN and the International Maritime Organization, arguing that the interdictions are carried out outside the framework of sanctions approved by the Security Council. For its part, the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense has deployed coastal patrols and radar systems in the northern maritime strip, with the aim of guaranteeing the free and safe transit of the national merchant fleet. At 2100 hours on October 13th, just one day after the operation, the Pampatar radar recorded the movement of 2 U.S. frigates 72 nautical miles from the Venezuelan coast. However, no incursions within jurisdictional maritime space were reported. The diplomatic response also included calls to ALBA and CELAC to coordinate common positions against the increase in naval control. In parallel, Russia and China, Venezuela's main trading partners, have expressed interest in monitoring the situation and ensuring that their cargo is not affected by the blockades. The Caribbean thus becomes the new point of logistical and political tension. Each inspection, each boarding, reconfigures the balance between sovereignty, trade, and military power. The operation that began at 3:45 a.m. on October 12, 2025, concluded with a thorough inspection of the freighter in the port of Willemstad, Curaçao, nearly 14 hours later. The preliminary results of the search, published by the Southern Command and confirmed by the U.S. Coast Guard, revealed that the vessel was transporting 20 tons of Chinese-made industrial equipment, along with materials considered dual use, meaning they have possible civilian or military application. The statement issued at 1930 hours on October 12th specified that among the containers, alloy tubes, high-capacity electrical components, converters, and insulating materials were found that could be used in both energy facilities and the manufacture of radar systems. The inspection was carried out with the participation of Dutch specialists and observers from the U.S. Export Control Agency. The report indicates that no weapons, drugs, or explosives were found, but that the contents violated the restrictions imposed by Treasury Department sanctions on the import of advanced technology to Venezuela. After verification, the cargo was temporarily confiscated, and the vessel remains under administrative custody while its legal fate is defined. The Venezuelan Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the procedure a flagrant violation of international law and denounced that Washington uses security pretexts to obstruct the legitimate trade of sovereign nations. In contrast, the White House maintained that the operation was fully in accordance with multilateral export control agreements and that the interdiction was carried out without violence, with full respect for the crew and under international maritime protocols. The repercussions extend beyond the incident. In the ports of Panama and Cartagena, maritime authorities began applying additional controls to vessels bound for Venezuela. Likewise, international insurers have warned about the possibility of an indirect embargo risk, which could further increase the cost of regional trade. Analysts consulted by international agencies warn that the operation can be interpreted as the start of a new phase of maritime pressure, where each inspection becomes a political message. The Caribbean, historically a commercial transit zone, is now emerging as a strategic security corridor under Washington's permanent gaze. With this action, the United States sends a clear signal. It will control the maritime flow to Venezuela with a minimal margin of tolerance. However, the true impact will not be measured only in seized tons, but in the capacity of commercial routes to remain operational in the face of political and military pressure. The case remains open, and the repercussions are just beginning. Now, we want to know your opinion. Do you believe this operation is part of a legitimate maritime control strategy? Or is it a measure of political pressure against Venezuela? Leave us your comment below and tell us how you interpret this move in the Caribbean. Your opinion helps us better understand the real impact of this type of action.